Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the international edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 10 important articles for a detailed analysis. We have 4 big articles that are relevant for mains and 6 small articles that are very important for the prelims exam. So let's cover all these topics in complete detail so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from the Hindu analysis, do let us know in the comments and do support us with your likes and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Before we start, don't forget that Conquer Prelims Crash Course is taking place both on our YouTube channel and as well as on the Unacademy app. As far as the static crash course is concerned, we have a number of important sessions lined up which are held on the Unacademy app every day at 6 p.m. And as part of the current affairs crash course, which is held on YouTube at 7:30 p.m., we have a host of sessions that are lined up till the end of the month. So please take a look at the sessions that we have scheduled for today. As part of the static crash course on the Unacademy app, today evening at 6 p.m., I'll be taking up the 3rd session for international relations where we are going to discuss some important static topics for the upcoming prelims. And as part of the current affairs crash course on our YouTube channel, Abhishek sir shall be taking a very important session today. I urge all of you to attend the class without fail, because this is going to be a marathon session on history. This would not only cover art and culture, but it would also cover other parts of history as well, which can be important for the upcoming prelims. So do catch the session live at 7:30 p.m. right here on our YouTube channel. The best way to access these classes is to join our Telegram channel, and at the right time we will share the session links. You just have to click on them to watch these classes live. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu by first looking at this article from page number 8. This article is very important for Indian polity under GS paper 2. The article is talking about the rules regarding how candidates contest elections. What are the rules under the Representation of People Act 1951 that governs contesting elections in India? So first, let's understand the context, why the topic is in news. And we shall take a deep look at this topic as it's a very, very important topic for Indian polity. In fact, this article will help us cover many topics both for prelims and even for mains. So first, the context. Recently, you might have heard that Congress leader Rahul Gandhi is contesting the current Lok Sabha elections from 2 separate constituencies. He is contesting from Wayanad constituency in Kerala, where the elections have already been held, and he is also going to stand for elections in Raebareli constituency in Uttar Pradesh. Now, this is not the first time a politician has stood for elections in 2 separate constituencies. There have been many politicians in India, including, for example, Prime Minister Modi, who have contested from 2 separate constituencies in one single election. So this brings up the topic. What are the rules governing the contesting of elections from different seats, different constituencies? What are the various rules governing Lok Sabha elections in the country? So that is what we explore in this article by looking at the RPA, Representation of People Act 1951. In fact, this is a very important topic under Indian polity. If you look at the main syllabus under GS paper 2, RPA is explicitly mentioned by UPSC. So under the RPA, which governs elections in the country, candidates are allowed to contest from a maximum of 2 constituencies. Is that clear? So please make a note of this. As per the Representation of People Act 1951, a candidate for Lok Sabha elections can contest from a maximum of 2 constituencies. So let's look a little deeper into the topic. Let's understand all the rules related to contesting seats, particularly for Lok Sabha elections. We'll explore the provisions that were there earlier, what changes were done, are there any restrictions on the number of constituencies a candidate can contest from. What are the problems arising out of this provision? What does the Election Commission have to say about this? So all these points will be discussed thoroughly. So just hang on for the next few minutes and let's discuss this topic in complete detail. See, prior to 1996, there was no cap on the number of constituencies that a candidate could contest from. There was no limitation, no bar. Basically, a candidate could stand for elections from multiple constituencies across the country. Now, this would always be a problem in the conduct of elections because the same candidate, let's say the candidate has won from 2 or 3 constituencies, then the candidate cannot hold on to all the seats, right? The candidate will represent one constituency at any given point of time according to the RPA itself. The candidate will have to give up or forego or vacate the other seats and retain only one of the constituencies, which would mean that for other constituencies where the candidate has won, by-elections will have to be held. So this increases the election expenditure for the Election Commission. It becomes an unnecessary burden on the Election Commission, and it keeps the country in constant election mode even after the elections have concluded. So that is why in 1996, the RPA was amended. The Representation of People Act was amended to place a restriction, to place a cap on the number of constituencies that a candidate could contest from. So by the addition of subsection 33 clause 7, candidates were restricted to a maximum of 2 seats that they could contest from. Is that clear? So this was a big change that happened in 1996, where the RPA was amended by the Parliament to place a cap on the number of constituencies that a candidate could contest from. Prior to the amendment, there was no bar, there was no such restriction, and this was leading to several challenges for the Election Commission. But now, the question is, are there any other rules governing the contesting of seats? For example, if you look at the assembly polls, which are held at the state level, there is a rule under RPA that the candidate who is contesting from a particular constituency, from a MLA constituency, has to be a registered voter in that particular state in order to contest. Now let's say, for example, Karnataka elections are being held. So those candidates who are standing for the Karnataka assembly elections, they have to be a registered voter in that particular state. This is mandatory. So it essentially means someone who is not a registered voter in that state cannot stand for MLA elections in that particular assembly elections. But if you look at Lok Sabha elections, if you look at the general elections, voter from any constituency in the country can stand for elections in any constituency. So basically, let's say a voter in Delhi or Rajasthan can stand for a constituency in Tamil Nadu or Maharashtra. They just have to be a registered voter in any constituency of the country, and they can stand for any other constituency in the country as a candidate. But there is one exception. The exception is for certain seats in Assam, Lakshadweep and Sikkim. Is that clear? In this case, the registered voter has to be from these regions, from Assam, Lakshadweep and Sikkim. The reason is, if you look at section 4 of RPA, it explains this restriction. There is a special provision for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Certain constituencies would be reserved constituencies. So unless and until the candidate is a member of the community, and unless and until a candidate is from these respective regions, they cannot contest for elections from these given regions. So these restrictions are added under section 4. In SC reserved constituencies, the candidate has to be a SC candidate. In scheduled tribe reserved constituencies, in the case of Assam, for example, in the autonomous districts under the 6th schedule, those are seats reserved for the tribal community members. Lakshadweep as well, there are seats reserved for the scheduled tribes. Sikkim, being a small state, has been protected, and only those who are registered as a voter in Sikkim can stand for Lok Sabha elections from Sikkim. So apart from these exceptions, in other states and union territories, anybody can contest election as long as they are registered as a voter in any state or in any constituency. There is no bar, no restriction. Now, what will happen if a candidate who has stood in two constituencies wins both the constituencies? Now, let's assume Rahul Gandhi, who's standing in Wayanad and Raebareli, manages to win both the constituencies. So what will happen in that case? According to the RPA, according to Section 70, no MP can hold two constituencies. An MP will represent only one constituency in the parliament, only one seat in the parliament, which means that the other seat has to be vacated. This decision is left to the discretion of the member of parliament. The MP who has contested from two constituencies and won both the constituencies will get to decide which constituency the MP will represent and which constituency the MP will vacate. So once the other seat is vacated, what does it mean? It means that by-elections will become necessary. Since the seat is now vacated, right, someone has to represent that constituency. So fresh elections have to be held, which essentially becomes a burden for the Election Commission. It keeps on prolonging the election process. It puts a logistical strain on the government machinery as well. And it becomes a huge burden for the Election Commission to keep conducting such by-elections in different constituencies. So this is a concern, a challenge, and it's one of the criticisms against this provision where a candidate can contest from two constituencies. Now let's see what Election Commission has said about this and also what the Law Commission of India has recommended. The Election Commission has opposed this provision. If you look at the statements of former CEC N. Swamy, he had stated that the Election Commission opposes a candidate from contesting from more than one constituency, primarily because of the burden it creates on the election machinery as a result of the need for conducting by-elections after the seat is vacated. So Election Commission has clearly taken a stand against it. It has recommended to the government to end this provision, to amend the RPA and ensure that a candidate can stand only in one constituency, not in two. The Law Commission of India also has supported the same recommendation. The Law Commission report also says that RPA has to be further amended. The amendment done in 96 is not enough. Before 96, there was no restriction, no bar. A candidate could stand in any number of constituencies. Thanks to the 96 amendment, it was restricted to two. But even this is problematic. So both Law Commission and Election Commission have recommended the amendment of RPA, which will restrict a candidate from contesting only from one seat. Now, are there any other requirements for a candidate who is contesting elections? What are the other criteria, eligibility requirements? Let's take a look. If you look at the age requirement, there is a minimum age requirement. See, universal adult franchise as far as voting is available in India. So once you're above 18 years, you become a voter. But doesn't mean you can stand for elections. So for standing for elections, there is a minimum age limit. For Lok Sabha elections and state assembly elections, the age limit is 25 years and above. For Rajya Sabha and the Legislative Council elections, the upper house, the age limit is minimum of 30 years and above. So please make a note of this. Coming to educational qualification, there is no minimum educational qualification recommended. So this is a matter of debate. There are those who criticize this lack of requirement with regard to educational requirement. Right? There are those who call for a minimum educational standard to ensure that well-educated youth can contest the elections. But however, there is a counter-argument, a very valid counter-argument, because in a developing nation like India, where education has still not reached every nook and corner, where every section of the society is not able to afford a quality education, placing such a requirement will make elections exclusive to the elite classes. It might make elections inaccessible for the weaker sections, especially from remote regions of the country. So it will defeat the very purpose of conducting inclusive, free and fair elections. So it's a debatable topic, but as of now, there is no minimum educational criteria. Next condition is the candidate has to be a citizen of India. Is that clear? And registered in some constituency as a valid voter for Lok Sabha elections. For assembly elections, the candidate has to be registered in that particular state. This is another criteria. Then finally, the candidate should not have been convicted of any criminal offense, which is punishable by more than 2 years of imprisonment. So in such cases of serious crimes where conviction has taken place, the candidates cannot be allowed to stand for elections. In fact, under the Constitution, there is a provision that provides for the disqualification of MPs and MLAs. Can you find out which two articles deal with disqualification of members in the Lok Sabha and in the Legislative Assembly? That's an assignment, a small homework for you. Mention those two articles in the comment section below. Now, coming to the disqualification, there are grounds for disqualification prescribed under these two articles. So under the Constitution itself, there are these two articles which provide the grounds for disqualification. I'm not mentioning which article it is. That is for you to find out and mention that in the comments. But let's look at the grounds provided under the Constitution. One ground is if the MP or MLA is holding an office of profit. Essentially, if a sitting MP or a MLA has a conflict of interest because of other positions that they hold, and if they stand to make financial gain, material gain, or gain certain advantages because of the position they hold, then the other office that they are holding becomes the office of profit. So as a MP, MLA, or as a representative, right, they can push for favorable decisions which could benefit their office, and thus they can make financial gains or material gains or advantages, which clearly represents a conflict of interest. So office of profit is not clearly defined in law, but it has been enunciated by the Supreme Court, and there are enough standards available to identify what constitutes an office of profit. So if a representative is holding an office of profit, that could be a ground for disqualification. Next, if the representative is declared to be of unsound mind by a competent court, if they have lost their mental balance, and if this is declared by a competent court, then he or she stands to be disqualified. The other ground is undischarged insolvent. Insolvency is essentially bankruptcy, a position where the person is not able to repay their debt. And if they remain in that position, he or she is known as an undischarged insolvent. So this is another ground because it shows the lack of financial responsibility. Then finally, if he or she is not a citizen of India or voluntarily acquires foreign citizenship, this could also be a ground for disqualification. Now coming to conviction in an offense. If the imprisonment is 2 years or more, for all such crimes, the MPs or MLAs, they stand to be disqualified. They'll be barred from contesting elections as well. Even if the conviction is by a lower court and they manage to get a bail and appeal the decision to higher court, even then it is a ground for disqualification. Is that clear? Even when the appeal process is going on, let's say at High Court or Supreme Court, even then the candidate stands to be disqualified. So these are the provisions that we have as far as disqualification is concerned. Now coming to my last point, what has the Election Commission done in order to bring in more transparency when it comes to contesting elections in India? For example, the Election Commission enforces the Model Code of Conduct to ensure that no corrupt practices are followed by candidates and parties. It places a lot of restrictions during the Model Code of Conduct when it's in operation. It ensures that paid news is kept under check. Political funding is kept under check. It has reduced the limit for cash-based donations from 20,000 to just 2,000 rupees to limit the flow of black money which can fund elections. The government introduced electoral bond scheme by claiming that it can bring transparency in electoral funding. But recently, as you all know, the Supreme Court struck down electoral bonds as unconstitutional because of the opaqueness that the scheme involved. So Election Commission, other than that, brings in a lot of tight restrictions during the election period. It works with the government machinery, the police and the paramilitary forces to secure the polling booths, the EVMs, to ensure that cash movement and any mobilization of alcohol, drugs, etc. is strictly checked by the authorities. So all such measures are put in place by the Election Commission to ensure the conduct of free and fair elections. So that is something you should be familiar with, especially the rules governing the contesting of seats by candidates. Now let's look at the next column from the same page that deals with India's pharmaceutical industry. I hope you know that India is called as the pharmacy of the world. India is referred to as the pharmacy of the world because the Indian pharma industry has a significant global presence and plays a critical role in the healthcare system of multiple countries. India is one of the world's largest producer of generic drugs and also vaccines. But of late, very serious concerns have been raised about the standard and the quality of drugs produced in India. Because you might know, in the last couple of years, there have been few serious incidents in foreign countries where Indian drugs were exported and consumed by the patients. For example, in the African country of Gambia, recently more than 100 children died after consuming questionable cough syrups produced by an Indian company, which was contaminated with ethylene glycol, which is highly toxic. Similar deaths were reported in Uzbekistan, in Indonesia, and in many other countries where young children who consumed cough syrups produced by Indian pharmaceutical companies, they lost their lives. This remains an allegation against India. Even WHO stepped into it and brought out some evidence to link the deaths with the cough syrups. But India has contested those claims, however. But it raises questions about the standard and quality that is being followed in India's pharma industry. So it's important to understand how is India regulating the pharma industry. What are the regulations we have, especially when it comes to the safety of the drug, when it comes to export of drugs to foreign markets, because this brings a bad reputation for India. Any such questions on Indian products, right? It will hurt the industry, it will hurt our exports. For example, in the food industry recently, there has been a massive scandal regarding the spice brands from India, from Everest to MDH, right? They have been banned across countries because of very poor standards and quality control and for the presence of dangerous ingredients. Ethylene oxide, which turns into ethylene glycol, has been discovered in Indian spices and banned by multiple countries. So this essentially hurts the food industry. It could hurt our food exports. Similarly, any such incidents tied to Indian pharma companies which are occurring abroad, it could hurt the reputation of India's pharma industry. And it's not that the whole pharma industry is like this. There are some very reputed companies which follow very strict standards. But few small scale and medium scale companies which bypass the regulations, which don't follow the standards, the safety norms, right? They might bring a bad name to the entire industry and to the country as well. Because if you look at Africa, for example, multiple African nations, they depend on India. Their healthcare system is dependent on India. In a way, India's pharma industry is the backbone of their healthcare infrastructure, as we supply most of the generic drugs and as well as vaccines. So given this importance of the pharma industry, not just for Indian exports and Indian trade, but also for employment creation and for India's healthcare industry as well, it's very important to strictly regulate the pharmaceutical industry in India. So we have an authority called the CDSCO, the Central Drug Standard Control Organization. The CDSCO is the nodal organization when it comes to issuing licenses, when it comes to regulating the pharmaceutical industry. There's also the drug standards, the Directorate General of Drug Standards Control in India. which verifies the safety of the drugs, but eventual licensing happens through the CDSCO, which is a central authority. But recently in 2018, the process of issuing licenses for medicinal exports, it had been delegated to the state level drug authorities. Instead of CDSCO directly issuing the license, the authority to issue those licenses, export licenses to the drug companies, it had been delegated to the state level drug authorities. Now this is where lapses have been found. The state level drug authorities appear to be in collusion, at least in certain states, with some of the small and shady pharmaceutical companies which are violating the standards, the safety norms, and these are the companies which are responsible for most of these incidents. So it raises questions about the functioning of the state level drug authorities and how it can harm India's pharma industry, how it can hurt India's image. So that is why recently the government of India has stepped in. The CDSCO has revoked the powers which were delegated. It has brought the authority back to itself. It has centralized this authority to issue licenses from here onwards. So since state level authorities were seen to be in collusion with some companies, since they were not effectively doing their job, the powers which were delegated has been revoked by the CDSCO, and right now CDSCO will be the sole authority to issue licenses to pharma companies when it comes to export of drugs from India. This is believed to help in streamlining the licensing process and the regulatory process. But however, there can be concerns as well, because when you centralize all the authority, this might lead to delays. It could push the companies to follow the regulatory norms more strictly, which could increase their operational cost, which could also hurt their business as well, because they may have to wait for the licenses. There might be substantial delays in issuing those licenses, or they will have to undertake changes in the processes to match up to the standards, the strict standards which will be enforced. So this will increase the operational cost, and it might create a disruption in the pharma industry. So that is a concern which has been expressed, but it is a necessary step. It is absolutely necessary when it comes to pharmaceutical products to ensure that the products are of the highest quality. And more importantly, they should be absolutely safe. So that is why the CDSCO has stepped in after these incidents. It has revoked the orders given in 2018, through which it had delegated the authority to issue export licenses to the state level drug authorities. So going forward, CDSCO will be the sole authority to issue export licenses. Now, please understand the importance of India's pharma industry to the world. There is some important data that I'm going to present now, which can be important both for your prelims and even for your mains. See, India is responsible for nearly 70% of WHO recommended vaccine production. Under the mandatory list of vaccines recommended by WHO, India produces 70% of the global supply. That shows how critical Indian produced vaccines are, especially for developing countries and poor countries, least developed countries. The global south depends on India's pharmaceutical industry. Essential vaccines like DPT, which is given to prevent diphtheria, pertussis and tetanus, India is the leading supplier in the world. The BCG vaccine to prevent tuberculosis, which is a deadly infectious disease, India is one of the top suppliers of BCG vaccine to the world. Even the measles vaccine, which primarily affects children, India is the leading producer and supplier. Even if you look at patented drugs which go off patent and then we produce the generic version of those drugs, India is the world's largest producer of these generic drugs, which are cheaper and affordable, even in developing nations and underdeveloped countries. So as a result, it's a global responsibility on India. It's not just about ensuring the safety of drugs in the Indian market, but the drugs we export should be equally safe. The standards have to be strictly followed. And now that is the responsibility of the CDSCO. Understood? So finally, what would be the impact of this regulatory change? What could be the final impact? The article says that it's a necessary move. It will help in streamlining the licensing process. It will bring standardization. It will force all these small companies as well to strictly follow the safety norms and standards. If there are any shady companies operating, they will be shut down. In fact, after these incidents in Gambia and Uzbekistan, CDSCO has already closed down several questionable small pharma companies which were not following any of these standards. Hundreds of such pharma companies have been closed. So the government will be very strict. It has to be very strict. Of course, there will be an impact on the industry, but it's for the good of the industry. Even the top industry leaders, they're not expecting any major disruption as such, right? Be it with regard to operational cost or the delays in getting the license. The CDSCO has said timely licenses will be issued. There won't be any delays as such. And the industry also expects these changes to have a minimal impact on them. But in the long run, it will really help. It will benefit India's pharmaceutical industry to rebuild the reputation which has been lost because of some of these allegations. Is that clear? Because going forward, there is a great opportunity coming up for India's pharma industry. In the next few years, some very important drugs, they are going to go off patent. Some of the patented drugs, which are very expensive, which are essential right now, their patent rights will end. The IPR rights that Western companies have on these essential drugs, these patents will expire. They'll go off patent, which means Indian companies can start mass producing the generic variants of these drugs. This is a multi-billion opportunity, a multi-billion-dollar opportunity for India. Estimates show that there is a $250 billion market that India can capture in the next few years because of the patented drugs going off patent. So imagine how big the market is, how India can retain its dominant position as the pharmacy of the world, how we can play a critical role in helping other countries to deal with healthcare issues, right? How it can create millions of jobs in the Indian market and drive India's growth and exports. So such regulation, streamlining of the regulatory process is absolutely essential. So in that regard, the revocation of the delegated authority is a good sign. And the CDSCO has brought back the authority to itself. It's the sole authority to issue export licenses. It will strictly enforce them going forward. If there are major breaches and violations, it is going to shut down those companies as well. Now, one thing India should keep in mind going forward is that we should prioritize research and development. In the pharma industry, even though we are mass producing vaccines and generic drugs, there isn't much innovation happening in India. There isn't much intellectual property being created by Indian pharma companies compared to Western pharmaceuticals. So that should be a priority if India truly has to become self-reliant, right? We need to produce the APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients as well. Right now, large percentage of APIs are imported from China. Almost 60% of APIs, which is the core ingredient to produce your drugs, is coming from China. So we have a critical dependency on China. So in those areas, we need to become self-reliant. We need to produce APIs in the Indian market itself and focus more on research, innovation to create our own intellectual property. Instead of waiting for Western products for the patent to expire and then produce the generic copies of it. Instead of that, we should focus more on research and development, create intellectual property in India, develop better drugs, more safer drugs in India, which will benefit the pharma industry in the long run. So that is what we learned from this important article. So there can be a mains question based on this. There can be prelims questions as well, especially regarding India's role in the world of pharmaceuticals. Is that clear? Now let's take a look at two smaller developments reported on page 12 and on another page. So let's look at this article, the third one. So on page number 12, we have this article referring to India's ties with Maldives. We have studied in previous classes how President Mohammad Muizzu, the newly elected president in Maldives, has taken a hostile position against India, has led to the derailment of relations between India and Maldives. So President Mohammad Muizzu, who won the elections last year, largely won the elections based on his India Out campaign by promoting anti-India sentiments and by promising that Indian military presence will be thrown out of Maldives. Mohammad Muizzu led his coalition to a victory last year, and he insisted that he will follow up on his electoral promise. So this initially led to friction between the two countries as well. There were other related controversies that broke out, and as a result, India-Maldives relations took a hit over the last few months. Mohammad Muizzu is seen as a pro-China leader, just like his mentor, Yamin Gayoom, who was the former president between 2012 to 2016. So we are seeing a return of anti-India, pro-China sentiments, and Mohammad Muizzu insisted that the Indian troops stationed in Maldives have to be withdrawn. Now, why were Indian troops present in Maldives? Indian troops were present to maintain some of the military equipment that we had gifted to Maldives. As part of our close defense and strategic relations, India had gifted a couple of ALH Dhruv helicopters and also a few Dornier aircraft for maritime reconnaissance, surveillance, intelligence gathering, etc. So India is a key supplier of military hardware for several small Indian Ocean island countries, and Maldives is one of the beneficiaries. Over the years, we had built a strong defense and strategic partnership. We had gifted aircrafts and helicopters like the Dornier reconnaissance aircraft, ALH Dhruv, which is an indigenous helicopter for medical evacuation, disaster management, search and rescue operations, and also for maritime reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, basically to help Maldives protect its exclusive economic zone. India has even gifted few naval vessels as well. So to maintain the military equipment, to operate them, to service them, around 76 Indian military personnel were deployed in Maldives. But since Mohammad Muizzu insisted that India should be out of Maldives, Indian troops have to be out of Maldives, India agreed to the demand eventually, but we convinced Maldives to at least keep the military hardware. Initially, Mohammad Muizzu was insisting that India should take back the helicopter and aircrafts as well. But India managed to convince Maldives to keep the military hardware so that it's helpful for Maldives itself. But we have agreed to replace the military personnel with civilian personnel. So Indian troops, around 76 Indian soldiers from the Navy and Air Force who are deployed here, they have been withdrawn entirely, and now they have been replaced by civilian personnel from HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. Because HAL is the one which produces the domestic variant of the Dornier. HAL is the one which has designed and developed ALH Dhruv, right? So civilian personnel from HAL are being deployed as replacement for the Indian troops. So this in a way retains the Indian presence in Maldives, and it also gives an indication that everything is not broken in the India-Maldives relationship. We might have withdrawn the military troops, but since the military hardware is being retained and Indian personnel will be maintaining them, that still shows that there is hope for India-Maldives relations. Next, on page number 9 and 12, we have another important update from international relations. We have been discussing about the Gaza war since many months. We have discussed the October 7th attack carried out by Hamas, the retaliatory war that Israel has launched into Gaza, the consequences of this war, right? This is something we have covered repeatedly. Now, one global concern that was there was Israel was looking to launch a major offensive at a critical border crossing called the Rafa border crossing. Even last week, we had discussed this topic. If you look at the map of the region, this is Gaza Strip, which you can see here, surrounded by the Mediterranean, Israel, and Egypt. This would be the Sinai Desert. This would be the Sinai Desert or Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. So this is where Gaza Strip is sandwiched. It's called the world's largest open-air prison, as Israel has blockaded Gaza from all sides since 2005. It has placed a naval blockade here in the Mediterranean. It has built a complete barrier on the land boundaries, and it had forced Egypt to shut the borders here as well. One of the only viable crossing points, border crossing points, was Rafa crossing over here between Gaza and Egypt. So ever since the war broke out, Israel has pounded North Gaza and Central Gaza, targeting Hamas. More than 35,000 civilians also have been killed, and Israel has been accused of using disproportionate force against civilians. It has been accused of committing a humanitarian tragedy. It's been accused of committing a genocide. Countries like South Africa, they have filed a case of genocide at International Court of Justice. It's been supported by other major powers like Brazil. So slowly Israel is losing all the support. It's losing all the friends, even its close allies France, United Kingdom, and even the US, they have been heavily critical of Israel's brutal retaliatory approach, where it has ruthlessly targeted innocent Palestinian civilians as well, including young children and women. So as the death count keeps mounting, there was a lot of pressure on Israel to not target South Gaza, particularly the region around the Rafa crossing. Because as the war continued over the last 8 months, millions of Palestinians were pushed into this corner because this was their only hope. Israel had not attacked the southern part of Gaza near the Rafa crossing. There was an opportunity that Palestinians were hopeful that if Rafa crossing is opened, they could flee into Egypt and seek refuge. And this was the only route through which international aid, humanitarian assistance has been coming in, from food supplies to medicines, etc. So this was the last refuge for Palestinians. More than half of the population, almost 1.5 million Palestinians, are cornered into this small region. They are cramped up into these unhygienic refugee camps and shelters, and they're reeling under a lot of stress. It's nothing short of a humanitarian tragedy that has been occurring. So Israel was under a lot of pressure from the global community to not attack Rafah. Even the US, its closest ally, which has given diplomatic and military support and financial support in the war, pressurized Israel to not attack Rafah. But now Israel has gone one step beyond. It has ignored the warnings of every country. Even India was critical of the disproportionate force that Israel was using. Now, Israel has started a major strike against the Rafah border crossing. The United Nations has said, it has warned that this could result in a massive humanitarian tragedy as 1.5 million people are trapped here. So in the name of fighting extremism, you can't go to the extent of slaughtering civilians disproportionately, and this constitutes a violation of international law. And this has been reminded to Israel by none other than its closest ally, United States itself. So by that you can understand the gravity of the situation. See, now if you look at Rafah, it has always had a lot of significance. If you look at, let's say, 1948, when Israel unilaterally declared independence and violated the two-state plan and never allowed Palestine to be formed as an independent nation. Following that, Arab countries declared war on Israel. The first Arab-Israel war took place. During this war, 1948 war, Egypt actually captured Rafah and even Gaza. For at least around 20 years, Rafah crossing and part of Gaza was under Egyptian control from 1948 to 1967. From 1948 to 1967, Rafah crossing and even Gaza was under Egyptian control. Briefly in 1956, when the Suez Canal crisis broke out, Israeli forces, IDF, they breached Rafah and committed a lot of atrocities here. Hundreds of Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces during the Suez crisis. I hope you have studied about Suez crisis in world history, right? Suez Canal provides a critical link between Europe and Asia. So Egypt, where Suez Canal is located, it tried to nationalize the Suez Canal to wrest the control of Suez Canal from the colonial powers. Britain and France in particular, they still maintain control over Suez Canal, located right across the Sinai Desert, the Sinai Peninsula. So Egypt started restricting the movement of ships. It nationalized the Suez Canal Authority. It limited the colonial control over the passage of ships and the control of the Suez Canal. And especially Israel was angered by this. Because through the Gulf of Aqaba, where Jordan and Israel access the Red Sea, Egypt was trying to place a blockade near the Strait of Tiran, which connects the Red Sea with Gulf of Aqaba over here. So this led to a trilateral attack on Egypt, where Israel aligned with Britain and France, and they mounted an attack on Egypt to wrest control of Suez Canal. So then Israel had committed a lot of atrocities here in Rafah, but later Egypt regained control as US pressurized Britain and France to step away from the Suez crisis. And Egypt since then has maintained control over Suez Canal. But later in 1967, when the Six-Day War took place, between Israel and Arab countries, During this war, Israel captured Gaza, including this side of the Rafa crossing. Until then, it was under Egyptian control. But during the 1967 war between Arab states and Israel, which is the second Israel-Arab war, Israel defeated Egypt. It captured not just Gaza and Rafa crossing, it captured the entire Sinai desert as well, Sinai Peninsula as well. So until late 1980s, Israel maintained control over Sinai until the Camp David Accords were signed in 1979 and Egypt established peace with Israel, recognized Israel and set up ties with Israel. Until then, Israel did not return Sinai desert. It was only after 1979, that is from early 1980s, that Sinai region was given back to Egypt. But Gaza would remain under Israel's control until 2005, until the rise of Hamas. In 2005-2006, Hamas won the Palestinian elections by defeating Fatah to win the Palestinian Authority. And since then, Israel blockaded Gaza. So that is the brief history, the geography of the region. So now, Israel has been heavily condemned by the world as it has started this last phase of the war by targeting Rafah crossing, where 1.5 million Palestinians are stuck in a very dire situation. The UN has been very critical, and what's interesting is that even the US, which has supplied arms and weapons to Israel, has condemned Israel's attack on Rafah, and it has stated that Israel is violating international law. If it is using American weapons to target civilians in Rafah, then it constitutes an international violation. The US has said it's inconsistent with international law. Even France, Britain, which are close allies of Israel, have criticized Israel's disproportionate use of force. So this happens to be a major development. India also has been against the use of disproportionate force right from the beginning. So what happens next is going to be very interesting, very important and significant. It's going to determine the fate of Palestinian people and the very fate of Israel-Palestine conflict. So we will continue to monitor this development. It's a developing story, but this is the big update that you should know about. Now let's quickly head towards the prelims section and let's look at the smaller articles for today. On page number 1, the Hindu carries a spectacular image of the northern lights. Many of you might have heard there was a massive solar storm just the other day. It is one of the biggest solar storms that we have witnessed in the last 20 to 30 years. Usually, this spectacle that you witness, the colorful spectacle called northern lights towards the North Pole, also called southern lights towards the South Pole, it is usually limited to the polar areas. You might have seen, let's say, Norway, Finland, Iceland, right, closer to the Arctic, to the north of Canada or Russia. This is where you usually witness aurora borealis, the phenomena called northern lights, where solar flares, solar storms interact with the Earth's atmosphere, right, and they create a visual spectacle. Even in the south, towards the Antarctic, from Australia, Tasmania especially, right, from New Zealand, even from parts of South Africa and Argentina, towards the South Pole you can witness a similar phenomena. But usually the phenomena was limited to the polar areas. But of late we have seen very intense solar activity in the last couple of years. Even last year, for example, northern lights extended all across Europe. As far away as Mediterranean, Italy and Austria and UK, northern lights were visible. As far as Ladakh in India, right? In Ladakh, northern lights were visible, and we have seen the same phenomena again. In fact, this image is from Ladakh, captured by the Hanle Dark Sky Reserve, where India has a major observatory. The Indian Institute of Astrophysics has a very important observatory at the Hanle Dark Sky Reserve in Ladakh. So this time, the Earth was hit by a massive solar storm, creating these spectacular lights visible as far away as California, to San Francisco, to Ladakh in India, and almost all across Europe. So in this context, you should understand what are solar storms and solar flares. Why do they occur? What is its impact? And what is a dark sky reserve? Right? What's the observatory we have in Hanle? Are there any other dark sky reserves in India? That's what we should understand. A solar storm is essentially a violent event, also called as coronal mass ejection. from the corona of the sun, due to intense solar activity, there is a mass ejection of electromagnetic particles. These are highly magnetized particles that are sent at tremendous speed out into space. These highly charged, highly magnetized particles, they travel at great speeds. They travel at the speed of millions of kilometers per hour, and they strike the atmosphere of the Earth. If not for the Earth's atmosphere, life on Earth would be impossible because of solar flares. The solar flares and the storm that you witness, it is all attributed to the sunspots on the sun. Sunspots are these dark colored regions because of the temperature difference. Because of the temperature difference and the high magnetic field present, which affects the convection currents, there will be few spots or places on the sun, right, in the coronal outer layer, where the temperature would slightly drop relatively compared to the outer areas. So this makes that region slightly darker and appears like a spot. So the reason why this massive solar storm hit the Earth the other day was because two gigantic sunspots have merged to form a much larger sunspot. Astronomers have estimated the size of the sunspot to be at least 16 times the size of the Earth. So this event, the merger of two sunspots, which created a massive sunspot, released massive coronal particles, highly charged magnetic particles towards the Earth, and that is what struck the Earth's atmosphere. And this happens to be one of the most powerful solar storms we have seen in several decades. Now, why is this important? Why are we concerned about this? See, solar activity can be extremely dangerous for modern technology. All your modern technology, from satellites to communication networks, power grids, even your submarine cables, the underwater cables that carry the internet, their functioning could be severely affected. Because the magnetic particles interact with the Earth's atmosphere and the magnetosphere and the ionosphere, it can cause disturbances, lead to the flow of charge or electric current, which can disrupt power grids, break down satellites in orbit. It can even damage the electronics in the International Space Station, right? It could disrupt internet connectivity and all forms of communication as well. And potentially solar flares can wipe out all satellites, all communication, and even all power grids. So that is the risk. Now the concern here is that solar activity happens in cycles. There is a short-term 11-year cycle. I'm sure all of you would have studied this in your school days as well. That solar cycle follows a 11-year cycle. There is a long-term solar cycle which lasts a century. So basically there is a high in solar activity for 11 years and it dies down for 11 more years. So it picks up again after 11 years. Similarly, once in every 100 years, there is a massive spike and massive fall. Until now, in the last, let's say, 50, 60 years, when modern technology was developed, we were in the low cycle of the solar activity. That's why our satellites, communication system, power grids were largely safe. They never witnessed extremely intense solar flares. All events that happened, they were all slightly minor events. But now we are entering the high phase. We are moving towards the high phase of the solar cycle, where we are going to witness more intense solar activity, most likely for the next 100 years, or maybe at least for the next 70 to 80 years. So this increases the risk for all modern technology, from satellites to internet communication. Is that clear? So that is what we understand from this article. Next, coming to the Hanle Dark Sky Reserve. This is India's first dark sky reserve, because to carry out astronomical observations, you need to be away from light pollution. Light emitted by cities, right, where you have street lights, vehicles, whatnot. This causes intense light pollution and it hampers astronomical observation. So you need absolutely dry and clear conditions with minimal light. You need dry weather, because moisture can also be bad for long distance astronomical observations. In an area where there is high moisture level, the far away light coming from, let's say, light years ago, right, from several millions of kilometers, it will start bending and you may not be able to get clear pictures. So in an area where you have preferably dry and cold weather, where there is limited moisture in the atmosphere, that is a perfect condition. And if there is almost zero man-made light or zero light pollution. So such spots or such areas are called dark sky reserves. They can be established, right, through the government as a dark sky reserve meant for astronomical observations. So in Ladakh, we have a place called Hanle, very close to the Chinese border. So here, Indian Institute of Astrophysics has set up a major observatory. All right. Then recently, the Pench Tiger Reserve in Maharashtra was designated as the first dark sky park in India. After Hanle, this would be the second dark sky reserve. But inside a national park, for the first time, a dark sky park has been set up. This will not only help the animals, because animals are very sensitive to light pollution, but it can also help in stargazing. It can help in astronomical observations, and it can promote tourism as well based on stargazing. So that is the purpose of establishing dark sky reserves. And India already has two of them, Hanle in Ladakh, Pench Tiger Reserve in Maharashtra. Next, on page 3, there's an article referring to the Delhi Ridge, which is a very important geographical ecological formation located on the outskirts of Delhi and also in parts of interior Delhi. The article is referring to the encroachment of forest land, the illegal encroachment that has happened around the Delhi Ridge, which is a threat to the forests and even to the animals present, the biodiversity present. It's also referring to the diversion, the conversion of forest land for non-forest purposes, which has been highlighted by a central empowered committee, which has submitted this report to the Supreme Court. All right, so that is the development here. So what is the Delhi Ridge? There can be a prelims question, a geography-based question based on this. The Delhi Ridge is part of the Aravalli Ranges. The Aravalli mountain range, which extends all the way from Gujarat to Rajasthan to Haryana to Delhi. It is lying in a northeast-southwest direction. That is the axis of the Aravallis. Correct? So it's one of the most important mountain ranges and ridges. Historically, it was much higher, but through erosion, due to erosion, its height has considerably reduced. But still, it acts as a major barrier. It extends all the way to Delhi, even inside New Delhi. For example, Raisina Hill, right, the very center of India's capital, sits on the outer edge of the northern ridge of the Delhi Ridge. You might have seen, if you've been to Delhi, the forest area as well, around Raisina Hill and even towards Gurgaon in Haryana. It's all part of the same range, the northern ridge of the Delhi Ridge, which is the northern point of the Aravalli Ranges. The Aravallis play a critical role. They act as a barrier by protecting the eastern parts from the desert winds coming from Rajasthan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and also from West Asia. Essentially, it has played a role in preventing these sites becoming a desert, from becoming a desert area. Also, it plays a role in the orographic rainfall and in diverting the monsoon winds as well. So it's a critical geological formation, right? And it also acts as a divide between the Indus Basin and the Gangetic Basin. So it essentially marks a water divide, a watershed that divides the Indus and the Gangetic Plain. So you need to be familiar with the Delhi Ridge. It's a very important geological and ecological formation, and there are plenty of protected areas present in and around the Delhi Ridge. There are few protected areas present around it because of the biodiversity that is present. Next, on the same page, we have a reference to Sahitya Academy Fellowship, and Ruskin Bond, the legendary author, has been recognized as one of the fellows of Sahitya Academy. I'm sure many of you would be familiar with Ruskin Bond and his works, right? He's one of the legends in the literary domain, and he has been recognized as a fellow of the Sahitya Academy. So let's understand what is Sahitya Academy, what is this fellowship? Just few basic points for your prelims. The Sahitya Academy is an organization that promotes literature in India. It functions under the Ministry of Culture and was established in the year 1954. Its primary goal is to promote a literary heritage of India in all the languages, also protect the languages of the country as well, further promote writing in all the languages and recognize the legendary writers and authors. So the highest award it provides, the highest honor rather, is the Sahitya Academy Fellowship. There is a separate award, don't get confused with the Sahitya Academy Award. Sahitya Academy Award is for the best work in literature. All right, but Sahitya Academy Fellowship, it is the highest honor given to the legends in the field of literature. Only 21 fellows can be present at any given point in time. Only 21 legendary writers who are seen as immortals of the literature world. They are selected, only 21 of them can be part of the fellowship. Is that clear? So this is the highest honor conferred by the Sahitya Academy. So Sahitya Academy Award recognizes the literary works every year, but Sahitya Academy Fellowship is like a lifetime recognition, right? So those who are considered as immortals of literature, the legends of literature, like Ruskin Bond, for example, they are selected as fellows, and only 21 fellows can be present at any given point in time. Next, on page 10, we have an article referring to flu-host switching. I feel it's another important concept from science and technology that you should be familiar with. What is flu-host switching? Now, if you look at influenza A viruses, if you look at influenza type A and strains like H5N1, the primary host is usually, right, it's the birds. It's usually called avian influenza. Birds are seen as the hosts, the natural hosts, which carry the pathogen, which carry different strains of influenza viruses, type A influenza viruses, such as H5N1. Most of these influenza viruses, they affect the poultry birds, the migratory birds, etc. But there is a possibility of the pathogens making a jump, a human jump. There is a possibility that other animals could become a host. For example, pigs. Pigs are known to be part of this evolutionary change where they become receptive, or they develop the receptors to which the viruses latch on to. For example, if you read about COVID-19, for example, right? SARS coronavirus 2 could affect humans because of a certain receptor in our respiratory tract, which serves as a perfect opening for the cell to enter your respiratory system. That's how the cell enters and then infects. Now, birds are susceptible for influenza, avian influenza type viruses, because they have the kind of receptors needed through which the pathogens latch on to the respiratory tract of the birds. But animals like pigs, over centuries, over millions of years, they have evolved to display both kind of receptors, human receptors and avian receptors in their respiratory system. This is a part of the evolutionary process, and they have started accommodating these pathogens. The pathogens also undergo genetic changes so that they can adapt to different host animals like pigs. So avian influenza and different strains of influenza viruses, they have undergone evolutionary changes to adapt for being a host, or taking the pig as a host. Now, the concern coming up through new studies is that cattle are also displaying similar signs. From sheep to cows, etc., they are displaying these changes where they are developing human-like receptors and even avian-like receptors, which is a perfect combination for the influenza viruses to mutate and adapt and start infecting the animals, the cattle as well, which will serve as a new host maybe in the coming years. There are many cases where the cattle have been infected already. So scientists are speculating that we are witnessing an evolutionary change where influenza viruses that primarily affect the birds, they could be making a jump, finding a new host in the form of cattle. And since humans work in more proximity with cattle, there is a greater chance of them jumping to humans, making a zoonotic jump. And thus it could lead to the breakout of a major epidemic or a pandemic. So this jump of a flu virus from one host to another host is called flu-host switching. So pigs were the usual hosts, right? Because they had adapted over years, both the species, pigs and the viruses, and they developed the required receptors to latch on to each other. Now we are witnessing another possible change where cattle, right, they are also undergoing these changes along with changes in the pathogens as well, where you might see flu jumping to a new host, that is sheep, cows, etc. So that is what we learn about flu host switching, where the flu virus jumps to different hosts and adapts to different host animals. Next article is related to lithium mining. As you all know, lithium is a critical mineral which is absolutely essential for making a transition towards electric vehicles. If we have to adopt clean energy, not just electric vehicles, even let's say solar and wind power, to store all the renewable energy, you need advanced batteries like lithium-ion batteries. So lithium is already a critical mineral resource. It's going to have a lot of strategic significance, geopolitical significance, because the reserves of lithium is very limited. India, unfortunately, is not blessed with great lithium reserves, although we have found a few initial exploratory blocks. The reserves we have is very limited, and we rely heavily on imports of lithium. So India has set up an institution, a public sector institution called KABIL, Khanij Bidesh India Limited, to hunt for critical and strategic minerals abroad, secure those resources and raw materials to power India's growth. So KABIL is looking at Australia as a key supplier of lithium to India. Is that clear? Australia is blessed with a lot of reserves of lithium. It's one of the largest producer and exporters of lithium as well. So apart from the lithium triangle countries in South America, that includes Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia. Apart from the lithium triangle, which we are focusing on, Australia is also a focus country for India for securing lithium reserves. So India is working out deals with lithium triangle countries, Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina. Right? KABIL is leading the initiative, and it's looking at Australia as well. We are looking at Australia as a reliable supplier because Australia is a close partner for India. We share very good strategic relations. It also has one of the world's largest reserves. It's one of the largest producer and exporters as well. So KABIL is looking to secure the license for mining lithium in Australia, jointly maybe, and procuring those lithium reserves to India. So that is what you understand. And please look at the top lithium producing and exporting nations. Now coming to the last article for today, on page number 12. The article is referring to a very important geographical location in the country of Panama. I'm sure all of you know Panama, which is located in Central America, where the Panama Canal is located. Just like Suez Canal, which is a critical shipping canal, a man-made canal that links Mediterranean with Red Sea and creates a shorter route between Europe and Asia. Similarly, the Panama Canal in Central America creates a shorter route between the Atlantic and the Pacific. By cutting across the Isthmus of Panama, which is a narrow land corridor that separates Atlantic and the Pacific, this man-made canal has been created in Panama. Now, right below Panama Canal, in the Isthmus of Panama itself, there is a forest area, a dense forest area along the Colombian border called the Darien Gap or the Darien Jungle. It's a very remote area, densely forested area, and this region is often misused by criminal organizations, not just to traffic arms, drugs, etc. Because Colombia is known for its criminal cartels, especially drug cartels. But this is also a preferred route for human traffickers. There are thousands and thousands of people every year from many countries, including India, who desperately try to enter the United States through the illegal route, or essentially the donkey route, which all of you are familiar with. So human trafficking cartels, they ship or smuggle these illegal migrants from various countries, from India, Pakistan, or maybe African countries, or maybe West Asian countries, right? People are desperately trying to, have a better life, to live the great so-called American dream. So every year, lakhs of illegal migrants are trying to cross over, primarily through the Mexican border over here, into the south of the US. But to make it to Mexico, to reach the Mexico-US border, different routes are employed by these human trafficking cartels. Sometimes the Caribbean region is used and they are pushed into Central American countries here, all right? And from here, they take a very risky route through very hostile terrain, very harsh climate, and even they encounter criminal groups and robbers and criminal organizations which might assault the migrants. So they go through a lot of suffering. Many people lose their lives as well. It's such a risky migration route. So Panama and Colombia are also part of the transition route. The Darien Gap, which I have highlighted here, right, which is present over here along the Colombia-Panama border, right? It's a dense forest area in Panama, the Darien jungle or the Darien forest. So the Colombian cartels which are there, the criminal drug cartels, they closely work with arms traffickers and human trafficking cartels. So they bring illegal migrants to Colombia discreetly. And from Colombia, they push them into the Darien Gap. And from here, they cross into Panama and they make their way towards Mexico to reach the US border. So this is a deadly route. The Colombian criminal groups, they often harass the illegal migrants, extort money from them. There are cases of even killings and sexual molestation and abuse as well, where these criminal gangs are inflicting pain and suffering on illegal migrants. So Panama recently went through elections and the new president-elect has said that he is going to close the migration route through the Darien Gap. He is going to shut the migratory route. It is used as a transitory migratory route by illegal migrants and trafficking cartels. So the Panaman leader has said he is going to close this migration route because of the security challenges and the social challenges it has created. So please be familiar with the Darien Gap. There can be a geography-based or a map-based question. It's located between Gulf of Panama and the Gulf of Darien over here. So this is the Central American country of Panama, the Isthmus of Panama, where the Panama Canal has been constructed. And you can see Colombia over here, the South American country. So just be aware of these basic locations, geographical locations. That's more than sufficient. So on this note, I would like to end the session for today. These are your practice questions for your mains answer writing. Please write them down, and I expect all of you to write an answer, because whatever I explained in the mains articles, it was in the form of an answer. I started out with an introduction, I gave you the entire structure with relevant facts. So use the same argument, the same points to write an answer on your own. That is how you can improve your answer writing skills. And if possible, please post the answers in the comment section so that it can help other students, and even I'll take a look at your answers. So I hope you guys have liked the session, and more importantly, I hope you have understood whatever we have learned today. If you benefited from the session, do let me know in the comments. It would make us extremely happy and motivated to do better. And if you like the session, do press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it for today. Thanks for watching, and tune in again at 7:30 p.m. for the history marathon session as part of Conquer Prelims by Abhishek sir. So that is it for now. I'll see you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.